What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and this evening I'm going to chat with you guys about Trump's tariffs on the foreign movies that are being imported into America. And so, if you are interested in conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. The reason we ask you to do that is because the like button basically allows more people to know that you enjoy this video, so that way they'll watch it, and that helps me. And you subscribing helps you make sure you're up to date on the latest videos I post. So, again, we're talking about the film industry and how it's being affected by the tariffs that have been implemented by our current administration here in America. Now, I'm not really into politics like that, but it's really, really important that we pay attention to this as artists, musicians, and entertainers because this is directly affecting our industry. So let's get into kind of the basics about. Well, I'll try to formulate a structure here. So we're going to talk about what is the American film industry, like what has it been going through for the past we'll say 40, 50 years. We'll start around the 60s and 70s, and then we'll get into how the landscape has changed for that industry and how foreign film companies and cooperating and filming in other countries and things like that has affected film industry. And then lastly, we'll get into how this is going to affect us today and what it's going to look like for maybe musicians next. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the facts here. I have a little bit of notes that I've taken just so I can make sure I'm, up to date on a little bit of the information here. But essentially, the film industry in America kind of started out very, very basic, right? It was a lot of people just trying to film cool ideas, tell cool stories and things like that. And the technology wasn't there. So there was a lot more focus on how things were filmed and the actual strategy and technique it took to really pull off a film. Either it was a Nickelodeon or whether it was just a short film or a full length feature film, right? It was really trying to portray either the message or the image that you wanted and put it onto a medium and then, give it to an audience. That was the magic of the film industry worldwide, was figuring out what camera, how to shoot, where to go, how to act, and how to actually portray emotion on film and things like that. And then how do we package it up and put it into a product that's valuable, that people really want to pay good hard earned money for. And so the thing that will always creep into, creativity and innovation is greed. And so the first thing we have to really figure out is how we can make a sustainable industry out of this. So one of the things that was a foundation for that was creating film studios. And this was basically, in a nutshell, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is basically a company or an organization that would produce or make films for the sake of making money. That's all they'll do. They'll make a film about, let's say, a bandit coming to a town and attacking a lady and tying her to a railroad track, right? Or they'll tell a story of a hero maybe flying in from another planet and then trying to save the world. Whatever the story wants to be, there are people whose job it is to kind of create these stories, put it into a really fantastic, let's say, medium, other film, paintings, music, whatever it is. These studios have to package this idea and then give it to us in something that we enjoy and want to, watch and pay good hard money for, whether it's live like a play or in a theater or on a DVD or on a CD. So as far as like, let's say we'll go back as far as like the 1960s, but film has been going like since maybe the 20s, maybe the 1910s when photography first began, but it goes very far. But we really want to focus on why these specific tariffs will be important for us as artists, right? So when we look at how much the industry has grown, so since the 1960s, it's approximately $1.1 billion were made in the box office. That's in the 60s, 1.1 billion. So then if we extrapolate that forward to about 2019, it says the box office averaged or made about 11.3 billion, right? And then comes COVID, the big old pandemic that ruined everything, right? And basically held us still. And there was a big, big decline. Now, if we use a little bit of common sense, the reason for the decline is that people aren't leaving their houses to go watch films in the box office. So there was a bigger spike in streaming and things like that. So basically, the film industry moved to a different medium for us to enjoy it, right? So then the next thing was that a lot of the different films and things like that that were coming out from, let's say, way back in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were usually pretty innovative for what it was. Like the writers kind of got together and created new ideas. When you think about the comic books back in the day, there were a lot of new heroes and villains and stories and heroines coming out and things like that. And we found a lot of value in all of that stuff because it was, again, innovative, unique, but a lot of it being innovative and unique had part to do with where it came from. So there was influence from other cultures and other countries and things like that, but it wasn't directly the source of creativity. And that's what made the art specifically valuable to both where it comes from and the artist. Because, I can make a song, and if it blows up in, let's say, Brazil or something like that, and I'm from America, that's cool. But that really only helps Brazil because Brazil is going to enjoy the music, maybe make music inspired from it, make dances, artwork, and all these other things that come from it. So there's a bit of transaction that happens when a lot of art gets appreciated, but we have to kind of understand how it works if we want to capitalize on it, right? And so let's look at some of the ticket prices from back in the day. So around 1961, they said like a ticket for a movie was 69 cents. And then today, extrapolated, it'll be up to about $9.16 today. So now if we consider the big price changes with inflation, it kind of averages out as far as the pacing of inflation and things like that. But then if we were to remove inflation and then look at, how much movies are making on an even playing field, they said the highest grossing films of all time were released before the 1960s, such as Gone with the Wind from 1939. But then in 1965, you have films like The Sound of Music and Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope in 1977 that are still at the top. Now, you can do your research about like where those films are produced and things like that, but it does kind of speak to the innovation and how you kind of have to be the source of creativity. I've spoken about that a lot on this channel. And so now we can understand how much of value creativity is for the film industry and how much we value it by, the ticket prices and things like that. So the value is still going up. The overall box office income and revenue is going up. So what's the problem with trying to focus on, let's say, creation and creativity in that thing? Well, the issue that you'll run into is that you won't be able to find stability in that. And I've heard it plenty of times that as a musician, even if we get a hit song or a hit record or something like that, that pretty much sets the career for most artists. Even if it happens years later, it kind of level sets everything that's going to happen for you and what people will expect of you. So if you think of Snoop Dogg's Gin and Juice, right? And then you fast forward, Snoop Dogg is doing a gospel album. You can find ways to set kind of a standard for yourself when you understand your level of creativity. So if you are the source of creativity, then you can kind of dictate where your value is going to be, not necessarily your value, but where your skill set is going to have a lot more value. So in Snoop Dogg's example, his hit song Gin and Juice showed a lot of, party anthems. Of course, there's vices and stuff. There's, gang and criminal, all this stuff that you can say is negative, but the skill set and creativity that he had in that song still bled into his creativity years later when he's deciding to make a gospel album. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about making a song, making a film, making a picture. If you want to, make a video game, are you in it for the long run, or is this, just a one-off thing? And so you started to see a dominance in movie franchises, and they became important because a lot of it was stability when it came to trying to capitalize off of something. So then you have things like Star Wars, where you see how that franchise is blown up and done wildly successful things. And then you also have James Bond, which is another really, really good one. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You have all these really, really cool franchises, but the idea behind why you would make a franchise is to kind of get stability for of course the actors and the writers, but you have like essentially an entire studio of people you've employed, from cameramen, engineers who build and probably repair and handle all of your electronics and equipment. You have software engineers. You have people who are in effects, practical effects, Foley artists. You have digital artists. You have, people who make your artwork, the stage crew who's going to do the lighting. You have costume and wardrobe. You have your makeup artists. You have your drivers, your chefs, the people who cook and feed you guys, the janitors who keep all the facilities clean, and then your lawyers and everybody. Like all these people come together so you can make this movie, this artwork, this play, or whatever it is. And so when you franchise a project or an idea, it makes the opportunities kind of multiply, especially if you're doing a good job as far as business. So instead of you all getting together to work on one big film, now you can work on probably the next 8 to 12 years of income or business. And so that's where you started to see a lot more studios lean into not necessarily franchising, but trying to glean off of each other in terms of creativity. So you'll see collaborations, you'll see silly stuff like spin-offs or TV shows, just trying to find that stability where you can keep either the name or the brand in people's eyes or in front of people's eyes. And so now we'll start to see who they want to target, right? Because you can't make a Star Wars franchise that's going to last, as long as it did and target everybody, right? You got to kind of be intentional about who's going to enjoy it. So there was a push for younger audience members to start attending movies and things like that around, I would say, like the 70s and 80s. That's what my notes are saying here. And it also says a significant majority of moviegoers were under the age of 30, with a large percentage of them having attended college. So a college, let's say, student was a majority of the time going to be the ones attending films. So that means they probably have income or about to get some income. They're around the age where they can, truly appreciate maybe an M-rated film down to like, just a pop culture smash hit film. And so they are probably the biggest, let's say, slice of the pie when it comes to the demographic that you want to target when it comes to films. And so that can play a role in how you franchise, because then you're not going to really make a franchise that's going to target, teenagers for the rest of their lives. You're going to try to target the teenagers' parents, maybe the teenagers' friends and people around them, and try to input some of the cultural references that they may enjoy as well. And so that's where you'll start to see Rugrats all grown up. You'll see stuff like that. So that way you can get more people relating. A Minecraft movie has done it where they'll try to input a lot of pop culture references along with the gaming references throughout the film. So it's a way to kind of get more of the audience outside of who they are really trying to target, which is the younger audiences. Now, another thing that began to happen was that a lot of the people who were going to movies over time, it was less of an event and more of just, I guess you could say, a part of your lifestyle. So like how going out for a drink felt like getting dressed, calling your buds, telling them which bar you're going to meet up at. You guys go meet up, maybe talk to some friends, meet some ladies, dance. Then you go home and you had a great night, right? But when that's kind of like every week for you, you do that 52 times a year, that just becomes a part of your lifestyle and you don't really think about it, right? So the value of the attendance of movies started to kind of dwindle. Kind of like when you hear people talking about going to concerts and things like that, they don't mind just playing the album or streaming it at home. And so as we started to see that, it says the US dropped significantly from a peak of 90 million attendees in 1946 to around 40 million just under 20 years later in 1960. And that was largely due to a rise of television. So similar to what I was saying about streaming, technology made it easier to consume, which made it easier to fit it into your lifestyle, which means the value of it in your day or in your week went down a lot. And so that plays a role in how I'm going to franchise my film, how I'm going to price my ticket, and how I'm going to make it, how I'm going to produce it. Because if I'm making a movie and all you're going to pay is, what is it, like $12 a month for Netflix, and maybe watch it once or binge my show just once, I'm not going to put maximum amount of capital into producing it, I'm going to be very frugal, if not a cheapskate about it. Just off, in general. Now, of course, there's going to be people who really, really enjoy film and are just going to create off the strength of creation, but that's not a majority of the people who are in the film industry, and that's not a majority of why people are employed by the film industry. Like I said, there's people who have nothing to do with acting or writing that are involved in making the film happen, that also need to feed their families based on the success of these films. So it's very, very, very key to pay attention to these things when you're creating a big film like this. If you're just, like I'm doing right here in the studio by yourself, the risk is a lot lower, but still you would need to very much pay attention to how you're going to capitalize off of the film you're making or the show you're working on. And so the next thing that I have on my notes here is that the end of the studio system. So it says the traditional Hollywood studio system, which controlled all aspects of filmmaking, began to decline in the 1960s. This led to more opportunities for independent and new creative voices. So similar to how, again, this was a long time ago, but this is similar to how the digital audio workstation became a kind of like a in the home application for a lot of people. And what I mean by that is digital audio workstations were ways for people to edit, create, and even manipulate music and audio sources. So like how I'm talking to you, I'm actually on a digital audio workstation, and this is a streaming platform as well. But I'm able to adjust the volume of my voice. I'm able to stop and edit the video. I'm able to do a whole bunch of stuff to my audio here. But if you have something like, let's say, an app called Fruity Loops that's available for free for everybody, then that means a lot of people have the opportunity to input anything into the market, into the industry. Now, it doesn't necessarily change what's good and what's quality, but it does kind of make it difficult for, let's say, you as an audience member to filter through all of the songs and the jingles and things that are coming out of the world, so you can get to either what you need or what you're looking for or what you want. And when that happens, especially in honestly any industry, when that does happen, it does make it harder for you to get the proper products, safer products, and even quality products. And so when we think about films, the end of the studio system, it probably led to a lot of people watching independent films that were probably just boring, terrible, whack, offensive, boring. So there's a bit of that where you have to have a certain skill set to really deliver a quality product, and if there is no standard, then you're going to have a quantity issue in your market. And so the next thing I have on my notes here is it says around the late 1960s, early 1970s, we saw the emergence of new Hollywood, with younger directors and producers gaining more control in creating films that often reflected social and political changes. So now you're seeing films being made by younger people based on how they feel about the world, and not necessarily creation about, just telling a story. And again, this is cool. This is awesome. It's just that the issue you're going to run into is that you're no longer making a movie for your audience to be entertained. You're now making pretty much a presentation, and it's not necessarily going to be entertaining. It may be informal. It may invoke an emotion, but it's not going to necessarily be considered, just a film by itself. And you'll see this usually in films that are really, really gut wrenching, really sad, or traumatic. Like you'll see horror films that usually try to push your sensibilities or push the boundaries of things that you are really, really sensitive about. And they're not necessarily good movies. They're not like technically great. They're just a cheeseburger. They just do what they're supposed to do. If the director wanted to creep you out, he creeped you out. If the director wanted you to just watch a 2-hour action film of just, guys shooting, then that's all it really is. Now, whether or not you enjoyed it is a whole nother conversation. But the impact of what that does to an industry means that now the higher quality of the thing we're talking about, meaning the, let's say, higher invested film, the film with bigger names onto it, the film with better expertise, is now hidden or maybe standing next to or clouded by all the other films that are coming out with it. This goes the same with music. This goes the same with food. This goes the same with technology. You can put out a new cell phone, but if it doesn't compete with the iPhone or the Android, I don't know what you're really doing, you know? So, and the next thing I have on my notes here says the international markets, like the foreign markets, have been increasingly crucial for Hollywood's revenue, accounting for roughly 50% of the total revenue in the 1960s and continuing to be a major source of income. So if you consider that if you have 50% of your total revenue coming from outside the country you are originating your film from, you kind of have to think back to what I was talking about when you're considering how you're producing your films, the capitalization of your films, and what you expect to get from, let's say, the life of your film, like what happens after people watch it. And so this is going to play a big role in how we're going to have to view a lot of these tariffs and things like that. And so the next thing it says is employment in the motion picture and sound recording industries has fluctuated, which, you know, that happens in every industry. But it says in April 2025, the number of employees in this sector in the US was around 411,000 people. Data from the mid 2000s showed employment in motion picture production around 180,000 to 200,000. So there's been a big jump just in that short amount of time between the mid 2000s and April 2025. Big jump. And that could be a number of things. They could be considering, you know, all of the people who joined over COVID through SoundCloud or whatever, all the people who signed up for ASCAP and BMI. Or this could just be just how the cookie crumbles. Like literally people will get hired and fired by the hundreds of thousands in this industry years at a time. And so then it goes on to explain how the impacts of technology and innovation has played a role in the film industry as well. And so the rise of television in the 1950s and 60s posed a threat to Hollywood. So just simply being able to view your favorite, let's say, TV shows and productions in your home was a big deal. And mind you, when the TV first came out, you didn't have like a bunch of channels to choose from. You had like a few, probably like 3, and they were on the same times, and you had to basically find the signal that they were broadcasting on, and then have to adjust your antenna to make sure you're catching the signal and then enjoy the show. And so similar to radio, it kind of brought the entertainment to you. You didn't really have to go out and get dressed and invite people over. You can just enjoy it right there in your home. So then fast forward today, you can watch your favorite motion picture film that they spent millions of dollars on an iPhone through Apple earbuds. And I don't know if that's the way they want you to experience it, but going back to trying to be capitalizing on the things you're creating, I think there's a conversation to be had about how they're going to capitalize off of you watching something they spent millions on a phone that you only spend, you know, $10 or $12 a month to get access to. And so the latter half of the 20th century saw significant technological advancements that transformed filmmaking, including quieter and more portable cameras, because I never even considered quieter cameras. Old shutter cameras, you can hear them actually shutter. So that's actually interesting. Synchronized sound recording, Steadicam, the Dolby stereo surround sound. I was there when that first came out. That was actually a fun time. And the early stages of CGI, computer generated imagery. So like being able to just put pixels together to kind of mask whatever's on the screen became a big deal, because now you can make crazy, wacky, fantastical things happen on screen with very, very little money. And so this really helped out a lot of filmmakers when they wanted to produce faster, more quantity, and be able to employ a lot of people, employ people in a more stable fashion. Like if you know somebody can do CGI, you can book them for CGI for a lot of things versus just this one film. And so when we are considering the new Hollywood movie movement in the 1960s and 70s, it was also heavily influenced by European New Wave cinemas, particularly the French New Wave, and films like Bonnie and Clyde. And they drew inspiration from, or I'm sorry, films like Bonnie and Clyde drew inspiration from French films like Breathless in their storytelling, editing techniques, and portrayal of anti heroes. Italian cinema, especially, I can't even pronounce this, Commedia all'Italiana, and Japanese cinema also made a splash in the US, resonating with a disaffected youth audience. So, coupled with all the technological advances, it made it easier for people around the world to really enjoy American films, but also it made it easier for everybody around the world to also put their foot into the film industry. Now, if you fast forward to today, and we just talked about how the employment fluctuates, right? You can see how this can play an effect on the biggest market share holder of the film industry being America. So, if Hollywood plans on, having some kind of competition with the rest of the world, they would have to be the source of most, if not all, of the creativity. So if today 50% of the revenue for box office films comes from outside, from foreign studios, doesn't stand a chance. And independent films in America definitely don't stand a chance. So there's a bit of there's a like misbalance or unbalancing when it comes to thinking about how the creation and the source of creativity is going to be happening, which then will dictate where the value comes from for the fans. So, if we combine all the different things that are affecting the film industry all at once, being that they're targeting younger audiences, there's an advancement in technology that pretty much happens exponentially, as well as fluctuation on employment with the ease of everybody being able to film and join the film industry. The next thing that's going to be affecting them is the genre evolution. So, I have here in my notes that foreign films have inspired and shaped American genres. For instance, spaghetti western genre of the 1960s through produced films in Italy significantly impacted the evolution of American westerns. And then Japanese samurai films like Seven Samurai in 1954 and Yojimbo in 1961 were directly made or remade or inspired iconic American films like The Magnificent Seven and the fistful or a fistful of dollars in 1964 and 1960. So there's a lot of things that are affecting the music industry here in America that don't necessarily come directly from America. And remember, 50% of the revenue comes directly from foreign studios. Alongside genres were also filmmaking techniques that were coming from outside of America that influenced American filmmaking. So techniques like montage editing, which is something I actually learned and didn't know, and it originated from Russian cinema, and that's something I actually like to see. And the visual style of German expressionism found their way into American film noir and other genres. Talented foreign filmmakers were often lured into Hollywood, bringing their techniques and styles and reshaping them for American audiences. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock, F.W. Murnau, and Ernst Lubitsch, who started their careers in Europe, significantly influenced American early cinema. So we do have a lot of films here that if I were to probably think about, I could probably piece together, some of the European and probably other foreign studio influences on probably some of my favorite films. And so then my notes start to get into the economic and business impacts of this. So it's important to understand that all these things that we've talked about so far had nothing to do with business. This is just simply people who maybe loved the form of art, of filmmaking, and decided to take upon it, participate, maybe exchange ideas, learn from each other, inspire each other, and just, grow with each other. The problem that we're about to see is going to start to happen when business plays a role. So runaway productions is going to be one of the first points here. As foreign markets became increasingly important for Hollywood revenue in the latter half of the 20th century, American companies began to realize cost benefits of filming in Europe and other locations. Remember, I was talking about trying to be frugal or capitalize on how you produce your favorite films. So things like lower production costs, fewer union restrictions, meaning how you are going to employ and pay your people, and fewer government subsidies, or maybe there were more government subsidies in foreign countries led to runaway productions. So this is where you would see, similar to, let's say, like the auto industry, where instead of producing factories here in America, they would place the factory outside of America because it was maybe cheaper to hire those people, or maybe there weren't as much red tape to go through in order to get your business up and running, and then you can just import the goods, or in this instance, the films, back into America. And so this trend has continued with many major US productions filming in countries like Canada and the UK and Australia due to tax incentives and other economic advantages. So when you hear people say, like, why are all the actors having like British accents, or why are British people always playing Americans? It's a little bit shown right here, where you can kind of get around certain tax codes, you can get around certain regulations and things like that, because your studio is based out in the UK or Australia or Canada or wherever you have it. And then you have international co-production. So just like how you would see people collaborating on genres or, ideas and franchises, they would also collaborate on production. So to access subsidies, meaning a subsidy would be like your government or the US government would give, like, let's say, grants or loans or just financial incentives to studios who maybe would bring an art film from France over, or maybe it's a young director from Germany and she's going to be producing a film and, bringing it to the film industry. There are subsidies that if you want access to and to tap into these different talent pools, like these writers and these actors, these different markets, maybe there's like a niche kind of audience you can tap into. American production companies increasingly engaged in international co-productions. These collaborations allowed for shared financing, risk diversification. So you could obviously share the cost of a film and maybe share the cost of hiring. If you want to get like Germany's greatest actress, maybe they will help you, pay a little bit of her fee in order to get her into the film, right? Risk diversification. So maybe you're not in charge of the equipment the studio in Australia is using, but you're using your writers and your employees. So you're kind of moving the risk in different places, right? As well as the creation of films that appeal to a broader global audience. So we talked about that as well. So this all is going to play a role in how the entire industry eats itself or consumes. And so when we keep considering the fact that today over 50% of the revenue comes from foreign companies and studios and productions, it kind of speaks to why this seemed so lucrative for so many American production companies. And then also we have here on my notes, competition and market share. While American films dominate the global box office, foreign films have carved out niches in the US market, particularly in art house cinemas and through streaming platforms. So off the top of my head, that immediately makes me think of all the little subcategories that you would see on Tubi, Netflix, Disney Plus, or wherever, where they'll specifically point out that this is a French film or a German film or a woman directed film or a black film. Like, they will tell you immediately on the streaming site that you pay $10, $12 a month for, that this film that they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, you want to see it, or you can see it, because it's here, not necessarily because it's a quality movie, but because it's on this shelf right here, and this is the shelf you're in. This is kind of the equivalent of when people go to the grocery store and they feel as if there's no healthy food because the options they're looking at are trash. So that's the similar thing that's happening here. So you'll have a bunch of films that you will have to scour through on like a Netflix or a Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you get your movies from, right? And now you have to figure out, well, what is good? What do I like? What do I want to see? What is new? What's fresh? Well, in order for you to know that when you're coming home from work and you're not a filmmaker or you're not a movie buff, in order for you to know that is we have to tell you. And I've spoken about that plenty of times, where how audiences have to be educated on the things that is happening around them, so that way they can make the best informed decisions for what they want to consume and properly critique it. So if they have a problem with a film, if they don't like it or they think it's bad, they can accurately say that without, misinformation or being overwhelmed with so much information. And so it also continues to say that distributors specializing in foreign language films have found audiences for well crafted international productions. The increasing acceptance of subtitles by younger audiences, remember, partly due to the popularity of foreign language series on streaming services, has also contributed to this. So, I mean, you can easily think of the anime streaming services, they don't just stream anime. Like, there's probably anime films, like whole, full films on there. And that if you're American and it's not your native language, you probably are okay with the subtitles simply because you enjoy the film for all the reasons we named before we got into this business side of things, right? And so that goes the same for, people who want to watch a Russian action film or maybe want to watch a French romance. You can watch all of these things at the palm of your hand or at the, you know, type of a computer keyboard, but it's typically and based on what we've seen done by younger audiences who again more than likely are the college age younger audience that has disposable income on entertainment like this. And so there are also the tariff threats and protectionism, right? Historically, some European nations implemented policies to protect their film industries from American dominance, such as the Cinematograph Films Act in the UK. More recently, there have been discussions and even threats of tariffs on foreign films entering the US, framed as a measure to protect domestic industry. So essentially, what the UK has already done, the US is going to begin doing. And it says, however, experts suggest that tariffs on intellectual property like films might not have the intended economic effect and could lead to retaliatory measures. So all that really means is that intellectual property being tariffed is really just going to lead people to use their intellect to try to get around the tariff. They're not necessarily going to be upfront about it. So you would see this similarly when you seen the tariff on autos in America. A lot of companies decided to either back out of it or to fully invest. And that's pretty much the contention you're going to see. Either they're going to play ball or not. And then it goes on to speak about the cultural and global changes. So exposure to diverse storytelling. Foreign films, this is why it's good to have foreign films. Foreign films offer American audiences perspectives, perspectives, stories, and cultural insights that differ from mainstream Hollywood productions. This is key. This actually made me really interested in films when I got to see things like the Onryo, which is the Ring, the original Ringu, right? Um, Films like that kind of put it in perspective for me that it's bigger than Hollywood because I seen The Ring first and then I got to see the original Ringu and it was pretty awesome to experience that. And I think having that experience is pretty much a blessing based on the options available. And it did exactly what it says here is that it the exposure can broaden horizons and foster a greater understanding of different cultures and societies. So like watching Ringu, I didn't know there was such a big supernatural aspect to Asian culture, just in general. I didn't know that because it's not as heavy in American culture. Like in American culture, we focus so much on like, the physical world, like violence, racism, emotionalism, and stuff like that. I never would have considered that if I hadn't seen that film. And then it made me watch a whole bunch of other Japanese and, well, not just Japanese, but they were mostly based in Asia because I was interested at the time, but a lot of different Asian films and how they were made. And so then it goes to say American films, while commercially successful globally, also serve as a form of soft power, shaping international perceptions of the United States. And that's kind of key and important. As much as people don't like to say this, it's important to be in control of how people look at you. And so when you see things like a film that you don't necessarily think represents you becoming the topic of discussion, let's say, for your country or your identity, then it can create problems for how the people who are enjoying the film view you. And the easiest way to point this out is through women. Whenever you see women presented in film, you can then see how the world will present themselves or project themselves onto those types of women presented in film. And it's not until you usually have a discussion about the film do people create the line between reality and entertainment. A good example of that is sex work in films, sexual violence in films, against women. And of course, you'll see things like language is a big one. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people for a long time thought people from Southern America spoke with a certain twang and had a certain level of intellect. And I'm sure people who thought the average white American man probably had like a certain implication upon him just based off the films that we produced here in America. And so that's key to understand as an artist, because you will then kind of take a little bit of real estate on how you're creating your catalog. So you'll see a lot of creators today, as I was saying earlier in this video, that they're just creating for the opportunity, like because they can, because they have it easier to make films. You can just upload a film on YouTube, you can film on your iPhone, you can just get right into the industry. A lot of people aren't really putting forth a type of end result for their career or an image or some kind of thing they want to communicate. It's very emotional or very sentimental, so there's not a lot of thought into how you're going to affect the perception of you, the perception of your audience, or the perception of the people you come from. And I think this is kind of the point where we can kind of grasp why you want to have the control here, because if you don't, then you will be up to the influences of everybody around you. So if you see things like I guess the big topic now is men and women in dating usually, but if you see things like men and women on film always arguing with each other and they're never like cooperating, they're never intimate, there's very little seduction, or it's always one-sided, which you used to see a lot in the 70s from sexploitation films, it can create a bit of perception in the real world for the audience, because again, the audience needs to be educated on what's cool and what's dope, what's hot, and what's gonna be popular. And so when we're thinking about foreign films, are those the films that we want to have 50% of the real estate as far as our perception, as far as our production, as far as our creativity? So let me know in the comments if this was interesting to you. This is a bit of a longer topic. I took some notes for you guys so we can make it, a full length thing. But if this was interesting to you, let me know in the comments. I want to know, what do you think? Are foreign films so important to you, or is this something that you think we can kind of work around and actually build a little bit more of identity with our American-based films? Let me know, and I'm out, y'all. I'll see you tomorrow night.